So whatever we have learned is like this. First, whenever we need to automate any application, first we need to understand very clearly, saying that okay, what are the test cases that we need to automate, and then you will be picking any of the test case. Then you need to understand the flow very clearly. Without understanding the flow, then you should never start, because whenever you want to do something, in automation, then it is very important for you to know from the beginning to end. Okay, so what are the steps need to be performed, what are the objects that you need to interact with, what kind of validations that you need to do. Okay, all this, what kind of data that you need to input, all these things that you need to understand. Once you understand, then okay, so you need to capture all the objects. Before that, okay, you might have done that's one time setting only, like how how the object needs to be identified. We have seen that some object identification setting, right? Okay, like selecting some properties, and for which object which properties need to be captured, and all we have seen that. Also, we need to do a required settings in the system also, like select the unified functional testing agent in the Chrome or Firefox or other browsers as well, whenever required on whatever the browsers. Then you need to capture all the objects, whatever the objects that you need to interact with, in the test case. Then you need to capture all those objects, and then you need to add those objects to the object repository. Then normally, instead of using, generally there will be two types of repositories that we discussed but not understood thoroughly, but we discussed about it a little bit. And one is called local repository, second one is called shared repository. And ideally we use shared repository. The reason why we use shared repository, because normally most of the objects will be repeated not only in one action, in multiple actions and all. Like you say, save button comes in every action, like next button, some links or all these things comes in different scripts and different actions. So if you add those objects to the local repository, those objects you can use only in that action. If that object is repeated in some another action, again you need to add in another action also. But instead of doing that, if you add them to the shared repository, those reusable objects, if you add them to the shared repository, then you don't need to re-add again and again. The shared repository will allow you or will help you to reuse the objects in multiple actions or multiple scripts. So that's the reason ideally we use shared repository most of the times. Okay, and then okay, after capturing the objects to the repository, then what would be the next step? You need to understand, okay, on which object you need to perform the action, what is the action you need to perform, and what is the hierarchy of that object, okay, added in the repository, including the class of that object and all. Then you have to write the script according to the class of that object, hierarchy of that object in the repository, as well as the action that what you need to perform. In case if you want to set the value, you set. In case if you want to click on that, then you have to use method called click. Okay, so like this you need to follow. This is what that we have seen. Also, now whenever you are writing the script, another important thing that you need to understand is you need to modularize your scripts. Modularization in a sense, like okay, dividing the scripts into the functional pieces for more reusability. Modularization is nothing but making the scripts reusable. Okay, so you have to modularize the scripts according to the functionalities. So it's always important that you have to uh, make your scripts reusable, make every piece of functionality reusable. So if we can make them reusable, then it will reduce the rework efforts in the future. So it will reduce the duplicate efforts. Okay, if you don't make the scripts reusable, then if any of the piece of functionality is repeated in some other test case or in some other script, again you need to rewrite, right? Instead of that, if we can make every functionality reusable, then tomorrow if that functionality is repeated in some another flow, then that will reduce your efforts, right? So it will make scripting very fast. Then if you want to make the scripts reusable, then what you have to do, you need to make every functionality individual instead of keeping all together in one place. You need to make every script individual. If you make every script individual, then the individual things can be reused, can be called later. Then how do you make the scripts individual, every functionality reusable, individual and reusable? By using the actions. Also, we have seen that, we have seen a lot of things about the functions as well. We understood thoroughly about the function, and then the functions, while learning the functions in the VB script, we learned that okay, functions are for reusability purpose. And also again, we have got actions here, actions also saying that it's for reusable purpose. Then it is important for you to understand the difference, what makes the difference between functions and actions. Okay, functions and actions. So that is something that we will have to learn by experience. I just don't explain okay now, and that's something that you need to learn by experience, by creating more actions, by creating more functions. Then you can easily understand whenever you are using them of functions and actions, then you can see the clear difference between them. Okay, that needs a bit of experience to understand the clear difference between the action and function. Okay. Right. So till there that we have discussed. Okay. Now the next thing is here. Let me again create. Let me start again with the scripting part. Okay. So now is it like this? I have created some actions already. One is create a new course. I'm just opening the existing test. Okay. So now in this test, if you look at that, we have got the actions already. One is login, another one is add course, and another one is logout. Right. So three are in this flow, in this functionality create new course. Three individual functionalities are there. Login is one individual, and add course is another individual, and logout is another individual. So let's see what is there inside login. So we have got the script related to the login. Right. Okay. Now let me take another scenario again. Let me take another scenario. Scenario is this time I'll say create an employee with the login credentials, or like I need to make more reusability. So create an employee. I'm creating another one. So now what I'm doing is create what I need is now I need to create an end-to-end flow. Create an employee with login credentials. Now let's say this login is already there. Login is already there. So I'm creating a new test here. Say employee creation actions. Okay, I'm just creating a test called employee creation actions. So login is already there, logout also there, but what I need is now in this, okay, I'm logging with admin user. Okay, I'll say admin here. Now, so what I have to do first? Okay, I need to go to the PAM. Then I need to go to add employee. First, I need to enter these details. After that, okay, so I need to. I mean, if I want to create with the credentials, then I need to select this checkbox, and then after selecting the checkbox, these objects will come with credentials, right? These objects will not come when we are creating without credentials, right? Without credentials. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to create one common action. I need to create one common action for creating an employee with credentials or without credentials. Login is separate. Login is one. Enter the employee details and save. That is another one. Log out as an admin. Another one. After that, you need to log in with the credentials. Whatever you are creating here. See whether the credentials are working. After that, you need to log out as an employee. So what you have to do? First, log in as an admin. Next, create employee with credentials, add employee with credentials, log out as an admin, log in as employee who got created, and log out as an employee. Right? This is the flow, end-to-end flow. Yes, so that's called end-to-end flow. Now, when you say it's an end-to-end flow here, as I said, like add an employee should be a common action. For what? For both with credentials and without credentials. How do you make a common action? How do you make a common thing here? By using some condition here. Now let's take a function. Okay, I'm just sample thing. I'm just creating a function now here. I'll just make like this function. I'll say add employee. I'll say with credentials. I'm creating one argument. Now when you're calling this function, if you give yes for this argument, it should be with the credentials. So you can add the condition like this inside the code. If this is equal to yes, then you write the script for performing this. If this is no, if I've given no here, then don't perform this and perform remaining. Remaining thing should be performed with respect of yes or no. And this inside the circle, whatever the circle that I have written, inside this circle, whatever is there, should be performed only when I have given as yes. Right? So now, when I will give yes or no for this, only when I call the function. Right? When I call the function, I mean, why should you call the function? Because you have to execute it. If you want to execute it, then you need to call it. Similarly, as like you call the functions, you are calling the actions, right? So when you are calling the actions also, what you have to do is sometimes, since okay, the action is containing the code for the entire create employee, but it should not be executing everything every time. So it depends on where you are calling it. It depends on the input that you provide. Then it has to execute some piece of code, and it should not execute some piece of code when you are calling it. So that means that as like you are passing the arguments to the function when you are calling it, then you must have to pass the arguments to the action also whenever you are calling. Okay. Then how do you pass the arguments whenever you are calling the action? How do you pass the values to the action as like you are passing the arguments to the function? Remember these points. I'm not going to tell immediately. Okay, so one by one. So that means that Sometimes what you will be doing, you will be making an action, you are creating an action, but the script inside the action should not be executing everything every time. Depends on where you are calling, depends on the situation, depends on the input what you provide. Then it has to execute some piece of code and it has to ignore some piece of code. Right? It has to ignore some piece of code. So to do like that, then what you have to do while calling the action itself, you need to specify. You need to create some arguments as like you create the arguments to the function. Then you need to create such arguments and then you need to provide the values to the arguments. That's one thing. And another one is now you say the create employee that I just seen, I just explained you. So what is that flow? First you need to log in as an employee. We have already script for login. Yeah. So you need to enter the username, password, click on login button, and then you need to validate. But validation is not yet done. The validation is employee should be logged in. So login is successful or not, we need to validate that. But we are not done the validations. That is the next thing that we will be learning. Then you need to add an employee, log out as an admin, and again you need to log in. Now the actions what you perform for the login, for admin login, for employee login, actions would be same, right? You just need to enter the username, you just need to enter the password, and then you need to click on login button, verify login is successful or not. No matter whatever the user that you log in, then the same steps that you need to perform. That means the entire functionality is being same, but what is being different? The credentials will be varying, right? Okay. Now, assume we have got already login, right? I will open that login action. Or you say, in this itself, now I need to log in as an employee. In this flow itself, I need to log in as employee. So since I have got the login action, then what I'm doing is I'm trying to call the login action here. I'll say call to existing, and then I will select the test that where I need to where the login is there, from where I need to call that login, and I'm just selecting the login action and then I call. Now the action has been called, say run action. Now if I run this script, with which credentials it will log in? Why only admin credentials? Now if you look at that, see the username and password has been or have been hard coded here. The username and password have been hard coded. Now if you have hard coded the values like that, then what will happen? Whenever you call it, every time it will use the same data when you hard code like that, even though you want to reuse it. But the script can be will be executed, but the same data will be passed every time. Also, as I told that, okay, so I have used or I have called that action by using call to existing, right? When I say call to existing, then the action will come as an external action, right? So now this login is external action here. The external action is read only. So now if I want to execute this for employee login, not for the admin login, then I must have to change the credentials here. But when I want to change the credentials, I cannot change. The reason because it is, external and read only. How can I log in as an employee now? I can't do it. Now if I go to the source, if I want to change the data now, what I have to do? I need to go to the source test. Source test is nothing but the original test where this action has been created exactly. I need to go there and then I need to modify. But if I modify there, then again it will impact on the flow where I need to log in as an admin. Right? For this, I can go there and then I can modify. But if I modify again, if somebody is executing the script for admin login, then it will be impacting them. right? What could be the solution for that? Now, if you do like this, then you can't call it as reusable. The code is being reused, but the data also should be reused. The code should work for different data. But every time if you do like this, what will happen? Every time it will use the same data. But that shouldn't happen. But in case if that should not happen, I mean, if you say that, okay, that should not happen, then what, how it should happen? Then, what could be the solution for that? But to understand what is the solution for that, you need to understand what's the problem. So the problem is now, okay, I'm not able to run that script for different data. Every time I'm running, I mean, I need to run only for the same data set. But unfortunately, I'm in a situation that I need to use different data sets every time, not the same data. That's the problem, right? So why that problem has come? The problem has come why you're not able to reuse it for different data sets because the data has been hard coded. That's the exact problem, right? Then how can you overcome from that? Then that's where something called, some concept called parameterization, data parameterization has come into the picture. What exactly the data parameterization means for? The data parameterization is something like this. Okay, so instead of hard coding the data, then you extract the data or you separate the data from from script, and you store the data in external place or in external source. Then you ask your script to take the data from the external source, right? So maybe you take from a local source, maybe any file which is saved in the local system or any file which is available for the correct test where that action is correctly located, like that. Now when you parameterize it, what you can do, you can create multiple sources for multiple tests, and then you can ask the script, if you're executing this test case, you can ask the data, you can ask the script to take the data from the source which is created for this test. For when the same action, when you're calling in another test, you can ask this action to take the data from the source which has been created for that particular test. If you are calling it in the another test, third test, then you can ask this action to take the data from the source which has created for third test. So for every script, one source can be created, one data source can be created, and this actions or this script can retrieve the data from the data source which has been created for that particular script. So one script, one data source, one script, one data source, so that for each script data can be separated, so that in each script the script can retrieve the action, or the test can retrieve the script, whatever you have written can retrieve different data sets because multiple data sources. So tomorrow, not only that, now you can run the scripts parallelly with the different data sets because data sources being different. Now for every test, no matter wherever you call this action, wherever you call it, the same source hard coded, that's it. So that's the reason what you need to do is, instead of hard coding it, you need to create an external source. The data source should be different, not the hard coded. That's something data parameterization means for. Next, now the another advantage with the data parameterization is, now you say like sometimes you have created a script, like maybe just to create employee itself or create course or create training, where you might need to, when you're creating an employee, you need to create 10 employees, not with the same data every time, with the 10 different combinations. If you hard code the data like this, then what will happen? First you need to run the script, first you need to update the data in the script, open that action, update the data, and then you run it. Once you run it, then what you have to do next again, Again you need to open the test. Again you need to change the data because another set that you need to execute now, and again you need to run. You need to run it for third time, you need to run it for fourth time, fifth time, like this. Every time you need to update the data in the script level and then do the modification, which consumes a lot of time again, right? Which consumes a lot of time. Also, when you have written this many lines of code and updating the code every time, sometimes you might forget one or other field. Then that will lead to a lot of confusion. I mean, because the script might fail because it will remain with the old data only in case if you have forgotten to update any of the field. Then what could be the solution for that? Again, the data parameterization. Now, in this case, what you do, instead of opening the script for every execution and modifying the data, do one thing. You use a source where you can store multiple data sets in multiple rows. Multiple data sets in multiple rows. Now, one combination of data, what you can do, you can keep it in one row. So, if you want to create 10 employees with 10 different combinations, then what you can do? You can create 10 rows with the 10 combinations, then ask your script saying that, hey, okay, I have stored this many rows, execute this piece of code as many rows as I have stored there. Not only 10 times, not only 15 times or 20 times, maybe it could be one time or two times, whatever it is. Then you execute the script as many times as the count of rows that I have stored there. If you want 5 times, then store 5 sets of data. If you want 3 employees, then store 3 sets of data. So that script will be executed for this many times and will be picking the data from one by one row automatically. That's how we need to, uh, instruct your script. Okay. So that's what the data parameterization. So data parameterization will help you to reuse your code for different data sets. Execute the code, parallelly execute your code with the different data sets. Will help you to update the data, test data easily without opening the script and all. It will help you to update the test data. Also, data parameterization will help you to run the script with multiple combinations of data. Okay, at a time. So, a lot of flexibilities are there. That's the reason what you have to do is you should never ever hardcode the data. Forget about the UFT. I'm not just talking about the UFT, and this concept is common across all but the way you parameterize or the code what you write might vary from tool to tool. But the conceptually should be common across all the tools in automation. This is common. So the main use of the data parameterization is to run the scripts with various combinations of data, to update the script without, so to update the data without touching the code, also to run the scripts parallelly with the different combinations of data. Okay, so that's what the data parameterization. So each tool has got its own sources for the data parameterization, and each tool uses its own language. But one of the common uh, way of parameterization, one of the common thing that what we do is, or we use, not we do, in any tool, most commonly used format for the data parameterization is what's that? Excel. And second one is XMLs. Most commonly used are Excels and XMLs in most of the tools. Then the third most common thing is database, because in every application now, let's say like RHRM itself, you have an existing employees, you create a new employees, where all these existing employees and all will be stored in the database. So sometimes if your test cases are saying that okay, we need to retrieve the data from or we need to execute the code for existing employees something, then you need to pick the data from the database and all. So sometimes that we will have to pick the data from database. All these are the external sources. In any of the automation tool that we have in the world, the three common sources we use for the data parameterization, the three common sources are: one is Excel, the mostly used. Second one is XMLs, and third one is database. Okay, database, to pick the data if the data is already existing in the database, like existing employees or existing users, or if the data is stored in the database and you need to use the data whatever has been already stored in the database, and then you need to pick from database. But if the data is something new that you need to pass, right, it's not there in the database, you need to pass new data, then you use Excel. And XMLs are mostly for configuration part and all. We use XMLs and all for configurations part. In any tool, whatever the tool that you use, then mostly these three things are mostly used. But at the same time, I mean, I hope we already know the Excel part. Like in the VB script, we have learned how we can read the data from Excel. And people who don't know, that we are discussing in the evening, right? Excel only. And I have already explained you about reading the data from XML, something called Microsoft.xml DOM. That also we know already. But again, we will have to use it. But we know the scripting, but we have not used in the reality. We are going to use it in the reality. And another part is database. Did I explain EDODB connection? Okay, a little bit I have explained. So, but we need to see it thoroughly again. Okay. Well, apart from these three sources, we are going to use the similar coding that whatever we have used. At the same time, what you need to do is, that's in our implementation, that is one that we are, those three that we are going to use. But apart from that, tool has got some inbuilt options for data parameterization instead of, those are external sources. But tool has given, or tool is giving the internal sources, inbuilt sources for data parameterization to store the data and pass it. But even though we don't prefer to use inbuilt sources, the reason why we don't prefer, because we will lose some flexibility. If we use inbuilt sources, we will be losing some flexibility in updating the data on them. So for the maximum flexibility, then normally we have to use external sources so that we reduce the dependency on the code and the tool. We have some inbuilt sources like, something called data table. Data table is nothing but, if you see view data, then this is called data table, which is very similar to the Excel. You can store the data as like you store in the Excel, and you can pass the data from this data table to script. But this is an inbuilt source. The Excel is, sorry, this data table is inbuilt source, which is not available in other tools. This data table is particularly in the UFT only, not available in another tools. So we can store the data in the data table, and then we can pass the data from this data table to the script. That's something that we will have to learn. One inbuilt source. There is a second one. The second one is, you go to settings here, something called environment, you call it as. And here itself you can create a variable and then you can create the value and you can pass the value and you can pass the value from here to script. That's something called environment variables. One is data table, second one is environment variables. That is also with respect to the UFT. Can't use in another tools. Next, one more is something called action parameters. Another one is called action parameters. What is meant by action parameters? I just some time back that I just told that whenever you are calling a action, whenever you are calling an action from other test to this test, you have to pass the values as like you pass the arguments to the function. You have to pass the values to the action when you are calling it, right? While calling it. So, and not only that, sometimes what happens is we need to pass the values into the action while calling it, and we might need to take the values from that action after executing it. So, you need to pass inputs, you need to take the output from the actions, right? While calling, while executing, and after executing. Then how do you pass the values into the action while calling it? How do you take the values from the action while calling it? Right? So action parameters would help. Action parameters will help us to pass the values into the action, take the values from the action when we are calling it from one test to another test. So third inbuilt source that what we have is for the data parameterization, action parameters, data table, environment variables and action parameters. Also in certain situations you might need to generate the random numbers, some numbers we need to pass the numbers, something called random numbers. Random number is nothing but it's not too complex or nothing, it's nothing actually, just wherever you need to pass some number, randomly generate some number and then pass it, then you can use something called random numbers. And the last one is something called test parameters or test arguments, you call it as. Test parameters or test arguments. Okay. Got that? So we have total 5 inbuilt sources. Apart from these inbuilt sources, we have something called Excel, we have something called Notepad, and we have already seen file system object, right? So why the file system object will be used to read or write the data from flat files like Notepad, and we can use XMLs, and we can use database to retrieve the data. So those four like Excel, Notepads, XML, and database. These four are external sources, and we normally 70-80% of the projects or 70-80% of the people would be preferring for external sources than internal sources, because when we use external sources then it will give you more flexibility to update the data instead of opening. When you keep the data externally, then you don't need to touch the code at all, or you don't need to touch the tool, or you don't need to touch the test to update the data. But when you are using inbuilt sources, Again, you need to open the test and you need to open the, open the tool, open the test, and then you need to change the data. That means that create some dependency on the tool again. But external sources will not create any dependency on the tool. To update the data, you don't need to touch the tool at all because it's external source is nothing but saved externally, right? So without opening the tool, you can directly open that file and then you can change the data. Anybody can change the data. So that gives you more flexibility. So that's the reason in the reality we will be using the external sources. But however, even though we are going to use external sources, it is important for us to learn the inbuilt features. So I told that some flexibility and all we miss out. So to understand that what we miss out, to understand what makes the difference between other sources and this, then you must have to understand both. At least to understand why we don't use that, then we need to understand that concept. Okay, so that's where that we will be starting with inbuilt data parameterization options first, and then we will move to the external. Okay, fine. So